Well, thank you all for coming. My name is Mark Taylor. I'm a professor of accounting. Many of you know me from class. Thanks for coming. We are very delighted to have the speaker that we have here with us, and it's my privilege to introduce him. Just a couple of comments following. We'll have some pizza and sodas over there for you, so please take advantage of that. And then for those of you in my classes, you know that you need to register your attendance, right? So either see Allison or Bill. It's my privilege to introduce the Honorable David Walker. He's the founder and CEO of Come Back America. And in his capacity, he leads CAI's efforts to promote fiscal responsibility and sustainability, which, as you all know, is one of our distinguishing Weatherhead themes. He does this by engaging the public and assisting key policymakers in a nonpartisan basis to help achieve solutions to America's federal, state, and local fiscal imbalances. Prior to assuming his current position, he served as the first president and CEO of the Peter G. Peterson Foundation. Previously, Dave served as the 7th Comptroller of the Comptroller General, of the United States and head of the U.S. Government Accountability Office from 1998 to 2008. This was one of Dave's 3 federal appointments, each by different presidents, during his 15 years of federal service. Dave has also over 20 years of private sector experience, including approximately 10 years as partner and global managing director of Human Capital Services for Arthur Andersen LLP. Dave currently serves on various nonprofit boards and advisory groups. He's a member of the Accounting Hall of Fame. Most of you didn't know there's an Accounting Hall of Fame, but he's a member of it. And interestingly, we have one other member that has close ties to the Weatherhead School, and that's our own Gary Previtz. And I think, Gary, how many members are there? It's only like 88, right? There's 88 worldwide members, and we got 2 of them here today. Dave is also a member of the Trilateral Commission and a member of the Sons of the American Revolution. He's received numerous leadership awards both domestically and internationally. He has co-authored 3 books, with the latest one entitled Come Back America, Turning the Country Around and Restoring Fiscal Responsibility, published in 2010, and it is a national bestseller. Dave is a frequent writer and media commentator. He'll tell you more about that, I'm sure, and is the subject of the critically acclaimed documentary IOUSA. Today, Dave will deliver his remarks entitled, Will a Debt Tsunami Crash on America's Shores? Following his remarks, which will be fairly brief, he will engage all of you in questions and answers. So please be ready to ask questions. Please join me in welcoming the Honorable Dave Walker to the Weatherhead Distinguished Lecture event today.
Thanks, Mark. It's great to be back at Case Western Reserve here in Cleveland. As was mentioned by Mark, I'm a member of a Hall of Fame here in Ohio. Normally, I try to make a joke out of it by saying I'm a member of a Hall of Fame in a city that starts with the letter C in Ohio. And of course, they guess Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, which is in Cleveland. And I'm the exact same age as Sting, who's in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Same month, day, and year. And some people guess Pro Football Hall of Fame. I said, no, I played on a national championship high school football team. I did, and I used to work for the Miami Dolphins when I was in high school. But no, I'm not in that. So it's the Accounting Hall of Fame, which most people say, what? What is that? Well, just so you know, it's in Columbus. It's an Ohio State University. This is a pretty international group. I pride myself in studying history, studying other cultures, and traveling extensively. I've been to 90 to 100 countries around the world, all 7 continents on Earth, as well as all 50 states. I want to try to get a sense, how many of you are from the U.S.? Raise your hand. How many of you from other parts of North America? Raise your hand. South America, Asia, South Pacific, Europe, Africa, Middle East, Antarctica. No, nobody from Antarctica. All right, fine. I'm going to focus my remarks primarily on the United States because of the subject of the talk, but I think it's important to note that a number of the challenges that I'll talk about exist in other countries as well to differing degrees. And one of the things that I'll talk about is how do we compare to other countries? Because unfortunately, a lot of times when the U.S. looks at itself, it doesn't look at how it compares to others. And that's a big mistake. Because when you're in, whether you're an individual, whether you're a company, whether you're a country, whatever, or a college, you have to know how are you doing on outcomes, are you getting better or worse, and how do you compare to your competitor or comparator group. And if you don't know all three of those things, you really don't know how you're doing. And unfortunately in the States, there's a tendency for our elected officials to say, well, we're the largest economy, we're the temporary sole superpower, you know, we must be top three in about everything. And in reality, we're top three in a lot of things. We're below average in a lot of things too, and you'll see that. For those of you that are Americans, you'll know that arguably the greatest political document in the history of mankind to date is the United States Constitution. And this is the preamble to the United States Constitution, and I've bolded and underlined certain words because the three most important words in the U.S. Constitution are the first three. We the people. We the people are responsible and accountable for what does or doesn't happen. If we don't like what's going on, then we ought to do something about it. And if we don't do something about it, then we shouldn't complain. And then there are other things that talks about what the federal government's supposed to do. But those words mean different things. For example, provide is different than promote. The government's supposed to provide for the common defense. It's supposed to promote the general welfare. Provide is an affirmative responsibility that really can't be delegated too much, national security, but promote is to encourage, not to provide. Well, you wouldn't know that when you see how government has grown over time. And the states are supposed to have rights. They're supposed to be sovereign powers. The federal government's only supposed to be doing things that otherwise the states can't do. Well, that's changed a little bit too. These are some of the principles and values that the U.S. was founded on. Limited but effective government, individual liberty and opportunity, personal responsibility and accountability, rule of law and equal justice under the law, fiscal responsibility and intergenerational equity, and let me add a new word, stewardship. And what stewardship means is, as a leader, whether you're in the private sector, the public sector, or the not-for-profit sector, and I've had the good fortune to lead organizations in all three, your job is not just to generate positive results today, not just to leave things better off when you leave than when you came, but to leave things better positioned for the future. That's a lot tougher thing to do. Because there's a lot of things you can do to make things look good in the short term, but you mortgage the future. Well, unfortunately, when you look at these principles, we're violating all of them right now to differing degrees. And so if we want our future to be better than our past, we're going to have to come back to these time-tested principles and values, make some tough choices. We've got a number of, and Mark said it, sustainability challenges that we face. Our fiscal policy, which is tax and spending, is unsustainable. Our energy policy is unsustainable. Our education policy is unsustainable. Our healthcare policy is unsustainable. Our infrastructure policy is unsustainable. Our immigration policy is unsustainable. Did I say healthcare? Just to mention a few. Our tax policy, meaning that where we are today with regard to those policies are not sustainable over time. And we're going to have to make a number of changes in order to help create a better future. Now, the challenge with that is our political system is broken right now. The Republicans are far to the right of the country. The Democrats are far to the left of the country. For the record, I'm a political independent, and I've been an independent for 15 years. And independents are about 40 to 42% of the population and growing. So what we're going to have to do is figure out what needs to get done and try to get the Democrats and the Republicans to work together for the interest of the country rather than for themselves or for their political party. And that's going to be hard, but it's not impossible. And it's important that we do it sooner rather than later. In 1800, which was even a long time ago for me, the U.S. government was only 2% of the economy. In 1900, it was less than 5%. Last year, it was 25, and it's growing to 37. if we don't change course. That's not good news. And the budget, the government's lost control of the budget. Less and less of the budget is controlled by the Congress each year. 40 years ago, they controlled over 60%. Now they control less than 40, and it's going down. Now, what does that mean? That means that even when you have a budget, you're not controlling most of your spending. Now, if you're an individual or you're a company, you can't have a budget where you only control 37% of your spending, and where the rest of your spending is basically a blank check, spend whatever you want. Well, unfortunately, that's how the U.S. government is managing its finances right now. And it hasn't even had a budget in the last 3 years. Well, that's a problem. Now, if you look, this is spending adjusted for inflation. So, inflation's taken out so-called constant dollars since World War II, 1945. I only know that through history books. For the record, I was born in 1951, so if you will. And you can see, if it's blue down below, it means the Democrats control the House and the Senate. If it's red, it means the Republicans did. And if it's mixed, it means it was split. And if you have really good eyes, and all of you are young, so you probably do, you can look at the top and see which political party controlled the White House. Here's the bottom line. Spending is a bipartisan problem. And it's been out of control in the last 11 years, and we're going to have to get it under control. Right now, the U.S. government is spending over $1.40 for every dollar that it takes in, and charging it to the credit card, and going to China, Japan, and all exporting nations to borrow the money. Right now, they're willing to lend us the money, but we can't count on their willingness to do so forever, especially at low interest rates. And I'll come back to that. From George Washington, our first president, to William Jefferson Clinton, Bill Clinton, our 42nd president, we accumulated about $5.6 trillion in debt. And of course, a trillion is 1,000 billion or a million. 5.6 trillion in debt. Now we're up to 15.6. So we've almost tripled it since 2000. And it could go up another 10 trillion in the next 10 years if we don't change course. Now, why should you care about that? Well, because if you're a U.S. citizen, guess who's going to get the bill? The young people are going to get the bill. There's only two kinds of taxes. There's current taxes and there's deferred taxes. And to the extent that you have deficits and mounting debt, that represents deferred taxes that somebody's going to have to pay. There's no free lunch. And so a lot of people say, well, we don't need the estate tax because I've already paid once. Not true. We're not paying our way right now. We're mortgaging the future of young people, reducing investments in their future at a time that there's going to be a lot tougher competition. When I say we, it's not me. I'm trying to fight this. This is a problem. Now, some debt's okay. Not all debt's bad. If you have debt in order to try to, finance an education, as long as it's a degree that's marketable, if you have debt to try to be able to buy a home, if you have debt to be able to buy your first car, those kinds of debts are understandable. And as long as you don't take on too much debt as a percentage of your income, you're going to be okay. And it's the same thing with the country. It's generally agreed that you can take on debt equal to about 60% of the size of the economy, and you'll be okay. And there's only been one time in the history of the U.S. that it's had more than that, and that was World War II. But, that was kind of extraordinary circumstances. But now we're over that again. We're over debt equal to 60%. We're actually debt equal over 100% if you count what's owed to our Social Security and Medicare programs, and we're adding debt at record rates. So debt's too high, and we're adding debt at record rates. So what we have to do is we have to figure out how are we going to end up getting debt as a percentage of the economy back down to about 60% in a reasonable period of time without undercutting the economy, without undercutting efforts to try to get unemployment and underemployment down. Because they're a problem right now. So you don't want to significantly cut spending now. You don't want to significantly raise taxes now when you've got a weak economic recovery, high unemployment, high underemployment. On the other hand, you've got to do something about the forces that are driving these deficits going forward. How many of you are accounting majors? Okay. Well, I'm a CPA, and I was an accounting major. And accounting is how you keep score. And how you keep score matters. And it doesn't make any difference what you do in life. It's a great foundation to have. And I've used it a lot of different ways. And so it should be a very marketable degree. But the problem that we have is not the deficits and debt that we see. It's what we don't see. It's so-called off-balance sheet obligations, promises that have been made that are going to have to be met in the future that aren't on the balance sheet. Unfunded obligations for Social Security, $9.2 trillion. Unfunded obligations for Medicare, $37 trillion. That if you add up the total debt and the promises, $65 trillion. Now, how much is $65 trillion? It's over $200,000 for every man, woman, and child in the United States. It's over $550,000 per household and per taxpayer in the United States. Median household income in the United States is $50,000. So that means under these current policies, the typical taxpayer, the typical household, has an implicit second or third mortgage equal to 11 times their household income, but no house to back the mortgage. And if you were a typical household making $50,000 a year, and if you were spending like the federal government, and if you ran your household like the federal government, which I would not recommend, you would be earning $966 a week. You would be spending $1,496 a week for a deficit of $536 a week. You would have express debt of $314,000 and total obligations of $1.4 million on a $50,000 a year salary. Not a prudent financial approach. Now, the difference is you as individuals and I as individuals, we can't print money. All right, legally. Now, a lot of people have been reading things that are in the news. You know, Greece, Spain, Italy, Portugal. And, people say, well, what's happening there couldn't happen here. Not true. The truth is, when you look at debt as a percentage of the economy, you have to look at federal, state, local debt to compare us to other countries. And when you do that, we're worse than some of the countries that are in the news. And when you count the black part at the top, which is what we owe Social Security and Medicare, we're only a couple of years away from where Greece was when they had their crisis. Now, we're not Greece because we're the biggest economy on earth. We're the temporary sole superpower. The U.S. dollar represents over 60% of the world's global reserve currency. We issue debt in our own currency. So all that means that we have more time. Not unlimited time. We have more time to get our act together. Plus, there's uncertainty in Europe, and we're a flight to safety. So as long as there's uncertainty in Europe, we'll have more flexibility. But once Europe starts to get its act together, people are going to start looking at us a lot closer, and we better have made some progress. Because if interest rates go up, that will have a serious adverse effect on the economy, on the federal budget, on individuals as well. Because interest rates are at historical lows right now. 2% we're paying for 10-year bonds. 3% for 30-year bonds. It's never been that low. And yet we haven't locked in these interest rates for the long term. So when they go up, you feel it quickly. Here's the rankings of the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development. So you're not going to see China in because China is not a member of the OECD. But these are the members of the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development. This is for fiscal responsibility and sustainability. Number 1 in the world, Australia. Number 34, Greece. We can kind of understand that. The U.S. is 28. 28. Down dramatically in the last 11 years. As I say, we're in a bad neighborhood. We need to take some steps and move on up. Now, this is what the budget looks like in the future. This is revenues as a percentage of the economy if revenues go back to the historical average of 18.3% of the economy. This is spending. And if the bar is above the line, that's called a deficit. Of course, that's all you see here. All right? And this is different time frames. What's the fastest growing expense? Interest. And what do you get for interest? Nothing. The biggest item of waste in the federal budget is interest. because interest is paying for past excess consumption. You get nothing for it. And it's the fastest growing expense. The second fastest growing expense, health care. Social Security is growing, but not as fast, and then other spending is assumed to kind of level off. So what does that mean? By 2055, that sounds like a long time from here, but y'all will all still be alive, God willing, okay? You should be with life expectancy. The only thing the U.S. government can pay is interest, for which you get nothing. Now, that can't be allowed to happen, but that's how dramatic it is. The fact is, we won't get anywhere close to that. We're going to have to start solving the problems within the next 3 to 5 years, or else we could find ourselves having some of the problems that these European countries have right now. Now, in health care, we spend double per person the OECD average, in fact, more than that. And yet we get below average results. And on defense, we spend as much as the next 15 nations combined on defense. And most of them are allies. And on taxes, we have a progressive tax system in the United States. We can debate whether it's progressive enough. By that I mean those who make more pay more. This is both payroll taxes, which you pay for like Social Security and Medicare, and income taxes. So when you talk about total federal taxes, the total of those two, the top 1% of the population earns 17% of income, pay 23% of taxes. Now, we can debate whether that's progressive enough, but it is progressive. Now, that's both payroll and income. Let's keep going. But we lose a lot of revenue because of deductions, exemptions, preferences, tax expenditures, tax preferences, which need to be looked at because that's spending. It's given a tax incentive for something rather than sending a check out the front door. It still has an effect on the so-called bottom line. This is the effective tax rate for income taxes only by different income levels. Let me just tell you the bottom line on this. On a typical year, 40% of tax filers in the U.S. pay no federal income tax. In a typical year, 40% of tax filers pay no income tax. They pay payroll taxes, but the payroll taxes aren't adequate to fund Social Security and Medicare, and the income taxes fund all of the constitutional roles of the federal government. You can't have that higher percentage paying nothing. You have to have more people paying something, but on a more progressive system. And here's the Warren Buffett problem. How many of you heard of Warren Buffett? Raise your... All right? Well, Warren Buffett's talking about, well, I don't pay as much in taxes. My effective tax rate is, lower than my, secretary, who probably makes a lot of money, okay? But the reason for that is twofold. Remember when I came back here and I talk about all these deductions and special preferences? He gets a lot more than those than she does, all right? And then the second reason is that people like Warren Buffett, the really wealthy people, they make their money on investments, on capital gains and dividends. And those are taxed at a maximum of 15%, no matter how much money it is. And so the reason that you get an effective tax rate of 18.9% for these people, despite their wealth, is because of the way the tax system works. And so that means that we're going to have to change the tax system to get more people paying something, and to get these people paying a higher percentage, but how you do that matters. How you do that matters. How many of you ever had to do a tax return? All right, how many of you done it by hand? All right, I do it just to prove it can be done. All right, now, what my personal view is our tax system is mind-numbingly complex, is an abomination, is not competitive, is inequitable, all right? And so therefore, the last thing I would want to do is say, well, let's just add some more rates onto this bad system, or add on a new alternative minimum tax on top of the one we already have, which we ought to get rid of, okay? And so my view is yeah, we've got to get more people paying, and we've got to get the people who are making a lot more money to pay a higher effective rate, but how you do that matters. We need to streamline it. We need to simplify it. We need to, make it more equitable and more competitive. States, You can look at your state to the extent that you're from the United States, because this is the net worth or the net liability per taxpayer by state. Best state in the union, Wyoming. If you live in Wyoming, there's a positive net worth of $15,100 per taxpayer. If you live in Ohio, it's got a net obligation of $4,700 per taxpayer. And if you live in Connecticut, which is unfortunately where I live, there's a net obligation of $41,200 per taxpayer. So my point is the federal government's got a problem. A lot of the states have problems. Quite frankly, a lot of the cities have problems too. And they have problems largely because of underfunded pension plans and retiree health plans and things of that nature. Those are off the balance sheet too. And so there's a lot of common problems at different levels of government that are going to have to be worked through, and we're going to need to do it soon so we can get the most powerful force in the world working for us. Anybody know what the most powerful force in the world is? Aha, there you go. Einstein said the most powerful force in the world is not nuclear energy, it's the power of compounding. And when you're an investor and you make tough decisions sooner rather than later, the power of compounding works for you. When you're a debtor or you kick the can down the road and don't make tough decisions, the power of compounding works against you. So we need to start getting the power of compounding to work for us rather than against us, and soon. Because keep in mind, bad news flows downhill. How many have ever heard that before? Bad news flows downhill. So when the federal government restructures, the states are going to feel it, and when they restructure, the localities are going to feel it. And the truth is, what's going to happen is the federal government is going to spend less and tax more. Let me restate that. It's going to spend less and tax more. So that means that individuals are going to have to assume more responsibility for their future because the government's grown too big, promised too much, waited too long to restructure, and it's going to have to do that. We can't grow our way out of the problem. The math doesn't work. We can't inflate our way out because the problems, Medicare and Social Security, grow faster than inflation. We can't tax our way out. We'd have to double taxes. That would stifle economic growth, make us non-competitive, undercut disposable income. We can't cut our way out. We would have to shred the social safety net and a lot of the constitutional roles of the federal government. So everything's got to be on the table. We're going to have spending reductions. We're going to have tax increases. But how you do it matters. When you do it matters. We used to have budget controls. We had budget controls from the early 90s to 2002. They expired in 2002, and things have been out of control ever since. So we got to bring those back. How many of you, all of you that are Americans, raise your hand. How many of you think you're going to get Social Security? Keep your hand up. All right, well, you are, all right? All right? Now, this is the frustrating thing. Social Security is underfunded $9.2 trillion. But we can reform that program, and every generation can get more money than they think they're going to get. Seniors are not going to get taken advantage of. Young people are going to get more than they think they're going to get because they think they're going to get nothing. I can exceed that expectation, okay? The truth is, the younger you are, the better off you are financially, the more you're going to be affected. And if you want to ask me in the Q&A how I would reform it, I'll tell you, because it's not hard. In fact, it's the first thing we ought to do because it's not that hard, and we can show that we can get something done, gain some confidence and credibility to do tougher things. Health care. If there's one thing that can bankrupt America, it's health care. We spend double per person and we get below average results. And the Affordable Care Act is not going to help because according to the chief actuary of Medicare, it's going to cost a lot more than the politicians claimed. And personally, I trust the professionals more than I trust the politicians. Maybe you feel differently, but that's how I feel. And so we're going to have to rationalize our promises. We need universal health care, but we've way overpromised. And believe it or not, the U.S. is the only major country on earth that writes a blank check for health care. Nobody else is stupid enough to do that. You can't write a blank check for health care. It'll bankrupt you. Even with the great Cleveland Clinic that's here, Defense and other spending, we have to cut defense spending and constrain it, and we can do that without compromising national security. I was on the Defense Business Board for 8 years. The Defense Department is a bloated bureaucracy. There's a lot of things that the Defense Department does based on past threats rather than current and future threats. You know, we're assuming too much of the world's security responsibility. That has to be more shared. We need comprehensive tax reform to make it simpler, fairer, more competitive, more equitable, and to generate adequate revenues to pay our bills and deliver on the promises we intend to keep. I'm happy to answer questions as to how. And we're going to need some constitutional amendments. Yeah, we're going to need a balanced budget amendment. We're going to need a line item veto. We need a credit card limit. We need a credit card limit as to how much politicians can mortgage your futures. Because let me tell you what's going on right now. The cold, hard truth. Politicians are mortgaging your future at record rates. They're reducing investments in your future at a time that you're going to face a lot tougher competition. And it's only going to be more so for your children when you have them. It's only going to be more so. That's not only fiscally irresponsible, it is unethical, it is immoral, and it must stop. And the sooner the better. And we're going to need some political amendments. We're going to need campaign finance reform. We're going to need term limits. We're going to need to change how we do redistricting and do primaries because the political system's broken. You know, too many people will wear red uniforms or blue uniforms, and whereas most of the country doesn't wear one of those colors, or at least a significant plurality. Last, many of you probably don't remember somebody called Ross Perot. How many ever remember somebody called Ross Perot? Read your history books, okay? Ross Perot was a CEO from the private sector, billionaire, created electronic data systems. Now it's been purchased by Dell. And he was a businessman that ran for president, never been in elective office, 20 years ago. And he ran on 4 issues: fiscal irresponsibility by Washington, political dysfunctionality in Washington, declining trust in government, and declining confidence in the future. The data today is much worse than it was 20 years ago. Perot got 19% of the vote when 20% of the public were independents. Now it's 42. So we'll see what happens this year because there may be a third option this year through the Americans Elect process. These are some things that I would ask you to check out when you get a chance. Take 5 to 10 minutes. Go online at fiscaliq.net. There's 30 true, false, agree or disagree questions. They'll help you understand whether you understand the magnitude of the problem and what it's going to take to solve it. As I said, 5 to 10 minutes. Over 50,000 people have done it in all 50 states and 85 countries around the world. The lowest average scores, minors, meaning under 18. The second lowest average scores, elected officials. The third lowest average scores, the media and journalists. That's shocking. You know, the politicians are the ones that have to make the decisions. The media is who we're relying upon to tell us the facts and the truth, and yet they score below the general public. The public's ahead of the politicians. The public's ahead of the media. The public knows that we have serious problems. They want truth, they want leadership, they want solutions, and they don't get enough of any of them. Check back our website. You can either go to tcaii.org or keepingamericagreat.org, and then a couple of more politically oriented ones, No Labels, which is for Democrats, Republicans, Independents that want to promote progress over partisanship, and Americans Elect is the process that's trying to create a third option, a unity ticket. You can't be the same political party to try to give a third option, which may or may not happen this year, to Americans for the presidential and vice presidential debate. In summary, the financial condition of the U.S. is worse than advertised. We face large and growing structural deficits in the future, driven primarily because of demographics, longer lifespans, fewer workers per retiree. we don't face an immediate crisis, but we could have one within the next 2 to 3 years if we don't start making meaningful progress. It's really important that the presidential debates this year and the election focus on this issue so that whoever's elected can make progress next year, because we could have a crisis within 2 to 3 years if we don't. The good news is that countries like Australia, New Zealand, Sweden, Canada have had these problems in the past. They rose to meet the challenge. If they can do it, we can do it. The good news is America has a history of ultimately doing the right thing after it tries everything else. Hopefully we can do it before we try everything else, okay? And the good news is that, you know, there is a path forward. There are ways to solve these problems if we can get some leadership. And if we do, America will stay great. It'll still be the land of opportunity. Our future will be better than our past. And it's really, really important that business leaders and community leaders and young people be much more involved in this than they have been. They have not been nearly involved enough, because business leaders and community leaders have a lot more impact on the political process, and young people, it's your future. And in 2008, young people voted in record numbers, but guess what? So did everybody else. And so your market share didn't increase. The only way that you have a disproportionate impact is if your market share increases. And so your market share needs to increase, because guess who's going to get the bill for all of this? It ain't going to be me. It's going to be all of y'all. And I want to help relieve that burden. Thank you, and I'm happy to answer your questions.
Okay, so I'm told that our pizza will arrive at 4:15, so we have lots of time for questions. So I'll pass the mic around, since one of my students turned me down on
I
the
came
prospect.
for the pizza, just so you know.
Hi, thanks for coming. I have a healthcare question. You pointed out how America pays double what almost everybody else pays for healthcare, and a large reason that we do is that we're essentially bankrolling R&D in pharmaceuticals and medical supplies for the entire world due to the joys of incremental cost accounting, that we're selling what we make to everyone else much cheaper than what we're paying at home.
Yeah, right.
How do you solve that without just completely halting healthcare R&D around the world?
Well, first, we're not the only country that does R&D around the world on healthcare, but we do a disproportionate share. And you're correct that there's not enough burden sharing with regard to that, because most other countries have cost constraints with regard to prescription drugs. They regulate the prices of prescription drugs. And so I think it's a combination of things. One, I think we're going to need to, we need to, through our tax code, to incent basic research, but not applied research. And a lot of things that are going on right now are applied research rather than basic research. Secondly, I think we need to have more competition and more competitive bidding on prescription drugs. The VA has that, all right? Other parts of government don't have that. But, you know, you're picking one piece of a much bigger puzzle. Prescription drugs are a problem, but it's not our primary problem. Our primary problem is the fact, think about it. For any system to work, you have to have three things exist. Number one, you have to have proper incentives that encourage people to do the right thing and discourage people from doing the wrong thing. Number two, you have to have adequate transparency to provide reasonable assurance that people will do the right thing and won't do the wrong thing, because lots of people are looking, all right? And thirdly, you have to have appropriate accountability if people do the wrong thing. I would respectfully suggest, when you look at our healthcare system, and when you look at our K through 12 education system, and I'll give you a third one, when you look at our executive comp system, we're a strikeout. We're 0 for 3, okay? So you raise a legitimate point. We need to have more burden sharing there too, because ultimately we're going to need R&D, but we need more basic research rather than as much applied, which is what we
To continue with her point on healthcare, I believe I read somewhere that healthcare in total is something like 18% of the
GDP.
U.S. of GDP.
Right.
If you're saying that we're spending ostensibly 2 times as much as other developed nations to fix that, that's basically a 9% hit on GDP. That's pretty much a depression right
Yeah.
there.
Well, that's
It
not what we're
seems
going
like
to do.
there's
yeah.
no good resolution. I mean, I know you can't worship at the altar of GDP, but it sounds like the fix is bad too.
No, I'm not talking about taking it from 18 to 9. Right now it's at 18, and it's growing faster than inflation and faster than the economy, much faster than the economy. What I'm saying is that we need to step back and focus on several things. Number one, how much universal health care, and I did say universal health care, is appropriate, affordable, and sustainable. Right now, we've overpromised. Right now, for example, for seniors, we've promised a tremendous amount, whereas for tens of millions of Americans, they get nothing unless they're poor, and if they're near poor, they get nothing, all right? So what I'm saying is let's step back and say, okay, we need preventative, wellness, and catastrophic protection for everybody, with options for them to get more than that if they want, and the government's always going to do more for the poor and the indigent and veterans. We know that. We got to have a budget. We can't write a blank check anymore. We need to start paying for outcomes, not activities, all right? We need malpractice reform, okay? We need to change our tax system with regard to how the preferences there. Believe it or not, Medicare, you all are aware of what Medicare is, all right? There's 3 programs in Medicare. Part A is mandatory. It's hospital insurance, paid with a payroll tax. B and D are voluntary, paid with premiums and general revenues. 95% of people who voluntarily sign up for Medicare get a 75% taxpayer subsidy for their premium, irrespective of income and wealth. Who's paying that? All right? So my point is, one of the things the government has to do is, we're not going to take 18 to 9. We're going to constrain the growth of the 18. And the way you constrain the growth of the 18 is you change the business the government's in, you change payment systems and delivery systems so that you're constraining the growth of the 18 to a level that's affordable and sustainable over time. So you're meeting broad-based societal needs, not unlimited individual wants, because that'll bankrupt you. Okay?
You were talking a lot about how we can't necessarily do everything because we're right now still in a state of recovery in terms of
Right.
the macroeconomy. And I was just wondering if you could say anything more specific about kind of the timetable for how you actually implement changes and when you know, like, when it's appropriate.
Well, first, understand that we're in an election year, so you're not going to see any significant things happen, in my view, between now and the election. So the question is, what's going to happen after the election? And what's going to happen after the election depends a large part on what the results of the election are. And by the way, there's a lot of decisions that are supposed to be made by the end of this year. For example, the so-called Bush-Obama tax cuts are supposed to expire. The Medicare physician fix and unemployment extension are supposed to expire. The cuts that are supposed to take place to defense and other spending are supposed to take place. All right? The debt ceiling is supposed to have to be raised again. All these things are supposed to happen between the election and the beginning of the year. And to give you a sense on how big that is, the deficit impact of those things over 10 years is $7 to $8 trillion. So it's big. Now, in reality, what's going to happen is they're not going to do all of that, because you can't do comprehensive tax reform, without going to the American people, you can't do social insurance reforms without going to the American people. So they're going to do a little bit. They're going to punt for another year, most of it, and hopefully we can do comprehensive tax reform and the first round of social insurance reforms next year. So I think we have to be realistic and recognize nothing major is going to happen this year, but we need, through the presidential campaign, to provide the foundation so that whoever wins, they'll have a mandate from the public to try to be able to do something next year so we can make meaningful progress next year. Now, when you do it, the way you're going to save the most money is you're going to end up making changes to social insurance programs in the healthcare system that's going to be phased in the future. But it's going to be phased in so you don't undercut the recovery, so you don't undercut the efforts to try to deal with unemployment and underemployment. But on the other hand, then you get the power of compounding working for you, because a little bit of changes applied to a lot of people that grow over time make a big difference in the numbers, a huge difference in the numbers. And if you want to find out a couple of ways to do it, you can go to our website, which is keepingamericagreat.org. There's something called a Restoring Fiscal Sanity Report. It's free. It gives you 2 ways to put finances in order. One's more aggressive than the other. They both involve, budget controls, social insurance reforms, spending cuts and constraint, and a tax reform with more revenues. They both involve that. One involves more investments than the other. Okay.
I'd be interested in your comments on the need for financial literacy in an environment where our political system calls a slowing of the rate of increase of spending a savage cut in government spending.
Well, first understand that politicians use words that don't mean the same thing as Webster's Dictionary or Oxford Dictionary if you study from Oxford's Dictionary. And I'll give you a couple of examples, one of which is the one that was alluded to. The word cut means an absolute reduction from the current. When Washington talks about cuts, they're talking about reducing the rate of increase. All right? Trust funds. You hear the term trust funds. In the private sector, when you have trust funds, there's separate and distinct legal entities. There's fiduciary liability. You can go to jail if you breach that fiduciary liability. You've got to manage the money for the benefit of the beneficiaries. In the government, when they have trust funds, like for Social Security and Medicare, you can't trust them. They're not funded. All right? So one of the reasons that there's a credibility problem is that when you actually know the facts, then a lot of the things that the politicians talk about are just not true, or they're grossly misleading. They might have a kernel of truth, but they're grossly misleading. So I think that the answer is that we're going to have to set expectations. No matter what kind of business you're in, the private sector, the public sector, not-for-profit sector, you have to manage expectations so that you can set expectations and you can try to exceed those expectations. And I think here a disproportionate obligation comes to the president, because the president is the chief executive officer, and the Congress is a committee, and the Congress is totally dysfunctional. You can't run a country by committee. You have to have a chief executive, all right? And so the chief executive is the one that's going to have to set expectations. The chief executive is going to have to use the right kind of vernacular, all right? The chief executive is going to have to help convince the people, we got to make tough choices. We need to do it soon. Here's the benefits of doing it soon. Here's the risk if we don't. The chief executive has got to provide a way forward. And then the people, the first 3 words in the Constitution, have to put pressure on the Congress, which is broken, to act in the national interest rather than act in their personal or partisan interest. That's what's got to happen, okay? And it starts with making sure that the general election campaign focuses on this, that hopefully we can get at least one of the debates dedicated solely to this, where they actually have to help us understand how they would address this and what the differences are between them so that we can make a more informed choice.
You begged us to ask, and I'd like to know, how do we save Social Security?
Okay. Now, I want all of you to listen carefully, because I'm going to ask you to raise your hand. All right? And even if you're not from the U.S., you can, feel free to vote anyway. What the heck, Understand that the second word in Social Security means something. It's security, not opportunity. And the reason being is that 22% of Americans, retirees, rely solely on Social Security for their retirement income. 22%, that's all they have. A majority of American retirees rely on is their primary source of retirement income. So what you have to do, recognizing that reality and recognizing that only half of American workers have a pension, half. And that the half that have it, it's defined contribution plans, not defined benefits, so the investment risk is borne by the individual. and that we have a low savings rate. So when you consider all of those things, I think the following. People that are near the poverty level, increase the benefit. People that are over 85, potentially add a means-tested supplemental benefit because too many people are outliving their savings. But means-tested, not automatic, it's based upon means. People that are middle and upper income provide a benefit, but somewhat less than under the current formula. Gradually increase the normal and the early retirement eligibility ages, 2 to 3 years, over 20 to 30 years, gradually, prospectively. All right? Change the cost of living factor to reflect cost of living for seniors, which is different than it is for other parts of the population. Their purchasing basket is different. Don't raise the tax rate, and don't eliminate the tax cap, which is right now a little bit less than $110,000, but raise it from $110,000 to $150,000, which means that, that those people will pay more, but not unlimited. And then add an automatic savings account of 2 to 3% of pay that would be payroll deduction, that would go in a real trust fund with real investments, with real fiduciary responsibility and liabilities, that would be in your name. It's a supplement, not a substitute. You'd have a pre-retirement death benefit, supplemental retirement benefit, and something to leave to your heirs. It would increase our savings rate, reduce our reliance on foreign lenders. That would make the program solvent, sustainable, secure, forever. Forever. Now, how many people think that's a reasonable way? Please raise your hand high. How many people don't? Raise your hand high. Okay, and you have to tell me why not. It's overwhelmingly yes, but you'll have to tell me why not separately, rather than taking time. But I want to come back to financial literacy for a second. It's well known that the U.S. is below average in math and science. We're also below average on financial literacy and civic responsibility. And I think that we have to address those because people have to be able to understand how to manage their own finances. They have to understand what their responsibilities are as a citizen in a democracy. And they have responsibilities, all right? And I think the fact that we don't do a very good job in financial literacy and civic responsibility is contributing to our dysfunctionality at the federal level, all right? You sure don't want to follow the example of the federal government with regard to your finances. And I think I've demonstrated that, okay? But I do think that's a real serious issue, and we've got to do more on that to help people help themselves and to help them become better citizens. Other questions?
Along those lines, could you just comment on consumer debt and its relationship, if anything, to the national debt?
Well, consumer debt got totally out of control because we became too much of a consumption-oriented society. I want it now, I'll pay for it later. Under the assumption that things were always going to get better. Consumer debt has actually come down somewhat. Individuals have cut back on their consumption. They're deleveraging. That's one of the reasons why the economy hasn't recovered as quickly, is because people are tightening their belt on consumption. Now, the federal government's not, okay, but hopefully it will over time in a prudent manner. I'll tell you one of the things that really shocks the heck out of me. When I go to a coffee shop, whether it's Starbucks or whatever, okay, I am one of the few people that pays cash. And I ask the Starbucks people and some of these other people, what percentage of people pay, not with debit cards, with credit cards? And they say it's over 60%. Now, I don't know what percentage of people pay off their full bill every month. I do. But if you don't pay off your full bill every month, then you're paying interest at 18%. So the true cost of that coffee is a lot higher than you thought. And so I think that, one of the things that we have to think about is not all debt is bad, but you don't want to take on debt to pay for wants versus needs and for normal recurring operating expenses. That's when you get in trouble, all right? And student loan debt's a problem. It just passed $1 trillion. And student loan debt you can't walk away from. Now, some of that student loan debt makes sense because it's based upon a degree that it's going to generate considerable earning power, but not all of it is, because not all degrees are equal, and not all institutions are equal. And so, people, and I think individuals need to consider that, and frankly, the government needs to consider that too, with regard to what it's doing in this area. So in general, we have too much debt, too much leverage. Individuals are starting to deleverage some. They're ahead of the government, and the government's got to be careful what it does so it doesn't undercut the recovery and efforts to deal with unemployment and underemployment. Okay? Other questions?
So I got a question about the communication of U.S. fiscal policy and the rest of the world. So as everybody knows, the U.S. dollar is widely used all around the world. So if the U.S. changes its fiscal policy, will it be a drastic change in terms of international trade and other international, there might be another international social repercussion because of this change?
The U.S. dollar represents a little over 60% of the world's global reserve currency. And we've lost some market share, but it's still the dominant global reserve currency. And I think that if we start to put our finances in order, then that will end up causing the dollar to strengthen somewhat. And if we start putting our monetary policy in order, which is, the Federal Reserve, money supply, that will help the dollar. The dollar has declined in value dramatically in the last several decades. And it will continue to decline in value unless we come to grips with our fiscal and monetary policy. But I would argue that we need to do that, and that is good for the world, because if the United States ever has a debt crisis, since the U.S. is the biggest economy, since the dollar is over 60% of the world's reserve currency, then that would cause a global economic calamity that everybody would feel. And so my view is we must avoid a debt crisis in the United States, but how we do that matters. How you do that matters, but we need to get started soon. And I think if we don't do that, it's going to be a much bigger problem than if we do.
One more question.
I was wondering, I believe financial transparency is critical, and I just find it rather unusual that the world's largest bank has almost no transparency to it. I was wondering what you think of as far as gaining financial responsibility in the U.S., what your opinions are of the Federal Reserve.
Okay, well, I did the cover article for Public Finance magazine for April, which is on the Federal Reserve, and you can get it online. But basically, my view is the Federal Reserve is in 4 lines of business. Monetary policy, which is money supply, setting interest rates and things of that nature. Secondly, bank regulation and oversight. Thirdly, clearing of checks and other transactions. And fourthly, bailouts. My view is that they need transparency in number 1, but not during their decision-making process. So they need more transparency post-decision-making. In all the other areas, they need much more transparency than we're getting right now. And they also need to be subject to more accountability in those areas than they are right now. Okay?
I'm gonna do one more.
Sure.
Thank you. I'm not a citizen. I'm still a subject of Her Majesty the Queen. And I think that means I was paying for a royal wedding last year, and this year I'm paying for the Olympics. So enjoy that on me.
Are you going to get us tickets?
Just pay for it. But I do have a green card, and so I live and work here. And I look around the room, and a lot of our students that we educate, both at the Weatherhead School and in the United States more generally, I guess the chances of getting a green card are about the same as winning the golden ticket in Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. Immigration policy doesn't help.
Yeah, sure.
And I wonder what your view is on that, particularly when, you know, a lot of these highly educated people probably don't want to stay here all their lives, but they might want to spend a little bit of working time in this country, pay taxes, go home, not be a future debt. Anyway, I just wonder what your take on immigration policy is more generally.
I appreciate that question very much. One of the things that I think I mentioned at the beginning was that we have a number of sustainability challenges, and one of which is our immigration policy. I believe our immigration policy is totally outdated and needs to be dramatically reformed. I think our immigration policy needs to be focused on much more on skills and knowledge, because that's how we have to compete in the United States. My view is if you get people that graduate with certain degrees from U.S. institutions, they automatically get a green card. Automatically get a green card, all right? My view is that our legal immigration policy needs to focus more on skills and knowledge and less on family relationship, all right? My view also is that, you know, we need to have temporary work visas in the United States. We need to differentiate between a pathway to legal status and a pathway to citizenship. They are fundamentally different things, okay? And I think we even need to look at the constitutional provision that says that if you're born here, you're automatically a citizen, which creates very perverse incentives. I think that's fine as long as one of your parents is a citizen, or you know. But if you're both illegal and you're born here, then all of a sudden that creates rights that extend back, which undercuts, I think, what we're all about. I mean, America is about liberty, opportunity, innovation. You know, I mean, that's what America's about. And I think we need to modernize our policies and practices to be reflective of that.
Students, it's time to get back to your studies. So we have to close
Thanks
this.
for coming. I know you've got these
Please
finals
join me in
coming up.
thanking David.